Hello, everyone, and welcome to another exciting, sure to be fun webinar by the ICPS, the International Carnivorous Plant Society. I am Kenny Coogan, the Education Director, and thank you everyone who is attending this live. If you have questions for Fernando, you can type them into the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and I will read them to him at the end. And with that, thank you, Fernando, for presenting for us once again.
Thank you, Kenny, and thank you everybody who's here and made the time. I'm happy to present this to you guys, especially because I put in so much work preparing this presentation for the ICPS in May, right? So much effort for 1 hour presentation. You look at those slides sometimes and think, wow, that was many hours invested for a single 1 hour presentation. So I'm happy to have the chance to present it to all of you who probably didn't get a chance to be there at the ICPS conference in Vienna in May. And so, yeah, the title is The Carnivorous Plants of the Amazonian Floodplains. And this is sort of a summary of some of the carnivorous plants we've seen while exploring the Amazon, which is not necessarily a habitat that most people associate with carnivorous plants, but you might be really surprised by the end of this presentation. So yeah, so thank you, ICPS. Thank you, Kenny. Thank you, everybody here. Let's begin. So some fun facts to begin, to educate all you gringos out there. So when we talk about the Amazon basin, we're talking about an area that is huge. It's more or less comparable to the size of the continental US. And it covers multiple countries and drains several different highlands in the north, in the west, in the south, eventually with all these rivers joining to the Amazon River and flowing into the Atlantic Ocean. So what else? Let's see. And there are a few different vegetation types, right? We tend to think of Amazon as something uniform, just a rainforest across the whole Amazon basin. There's actually a lot of diversity. When you're going through the Amazon, sometimes you'll see it along the rivers, or when you're flying over it, you'll see patches of different colors. And yeah, most of it can be defined as tropical rainforest, of course, but there's also some parts of the basin that are actually savanna vegetation. And there's a lot of like grassland sort of islands dotted throughout the Amazon, especially in the northern part, northwestern part of the Amazon basin. A lot of like sandy plains. And we'll be talking about one of these types of habitats a lot. In Portuguese, we call it campinarana. And just think of it as sort of a grassy, sandy plain, usually along rivers and most often along blackwater rivers. We're going to talk a little bit more about that, but the water that drains different highlands comes off with different minerals, different chemical compositions. Yeah. Carnivorous plants in the rainforest, you won't really find any. There are maybe in the cloud forests at the foothills of the Andes, you'll find some epiphytic utricularia. In the rivers that go through the rainforest, you'll find some aquatic utricularia, but you won't really find any terrestrial carnivorous plants growing in the rainforest habitats themselves. Whereas in the savanna habitats, usually along the edges of the Amazon rainforest, there are a ton of carnivorous plant species. Most of these I've already talked about for years. You guys are probably familiar with many of the names. We are not going to be talking about these habitats. That's been covered. And of course, there's the famous Tepuy Highlands in southern Venezuela, northern Brazil, eastern western Guyana. There's that whole Guyana Highlands area, which is very famous, of course. Lots of carnivorous plants in this area. Of course, Helianthera are there and tons of other carnivorous plants. We are not going to be talking about them either. They've been covered a lot in other presentations, right? So forget savannas, forget highlands. We're going to focus on the rainforest regions, but not exactly rainforest vegetation. So as I was mentioning, the only carnivorous plants that you really see in the rainforest areas are the aquatic utricularia, which the only way for you to see really is if you go in little boats, you know, swimming along rivers or rowing along rivers, and you'll find other cool stuff like this giant, oh my gosh, what do you call this? Nymphea, the water lily, giant water lily. And Once in a while, you'll see, especially Utricularia foliosa or Utricularia gibba, which are weeds, of course, everywhere. Very common throughout not just the Amazon, but the Americas and even other continents. Foliosa is pretty variable, and very often you'll see these very short sort of flowerscapes that are very fat. Doesn't seem like it's any subspecies, just natural variation. In one of these populations that we found in the Amazon, I thought it was interesting that there are a lot of tracks clustered at the very base of the flowerscapes, like you see in these pictures. What does this mean? I have no idea. Why are they clustered like that? I'd never seen that before. I can't tell you. Another important thing to think about when we talk about Amazon, the volume of water in the rivers varies tremendously every year. Whether it's dry season or wet season in the northern part of the Amazon, the southern, western, eastern, whatever, depending where you are in the Amazon, the rivers might be several meters higher or lower than just a few weeks or months before. So water levels they vary tremendously throughout the year, and even from one year to another. So here, for example, the famous dashboard of sorts that we have at the port of Manaus in central Brazil, in central part of the Amazon in Brazil. It's on the Rio Negro, which is one of the biggest rivers, and like the name of the river says Negro, black. It's a black water river. And in the port of Manaus, so they measure the height of the water every year. So here you have the highest level of water every single year where it reached. And there's a lot of variability. And this, of course, was taken in the dry season. You don't even see the water in this picture. So there's about a 10-meter variation in water levels at this one point in Manaus from year to year. So if you're flying over some of these rivers, you may see either one of the two images on the screen. You might see it completely dry with just like a little trickle of water in the middle and sandy banks along the river edges, or you might see it completely flooded and flooding into the neighboring rainforest. This is true for any of the rivers in the Amazon, huge variations. My research with carnivorous plants in the Amazon started a little bit by accident. I was actually on my way to climb a mountain in the Guiana Highlands, and I stopped at the herbarium in Manaus back in 1998. And I saw this little sundew. And up until then, I had no idea that there were sundews in the actual Amazon basin. Again, terrestrial carnivorous plants for me were non-existent in the rainforest areas. And I saw this little thing, and it was weird. It had like a short little flowerscape. I even thought it was maybe the myrticalis, Drosera myrticalis, which at the time I was really keen on. I even put here that it was similar to myrticalis. Later on, I found out it's just a convergence. They're not actually closely related. But anyways, I was looking at this like, wow, this is a lowland sundew. They can actually grow in the lowlands. This is like the first little insight into the fact that carnivorous plants do grow in the lowlands in the Amazon basin. So I found in the herbarium a few collections from 1960s, 1990s. And of course, I put a completely wrong label because I had no clue what the hell this plant was. So I went looking for this plant. The problem is that the name of the location was very vague. And again, the Amazon basin is huge. So I had to do a lot of detective work with some of the local botanists to find out where that was. And transportation along the rivers. Rivers are highways in the Amazon. You don't really have roads crisscrossing the Amazon or railways. It's rivers. So these big boats here, like you see in the top right, this is how people get around. These are the buses. And sometimes it'll take days going from one city to another, and people sleep in hammocks like you see here. It's actually pretty comfortable with the swaying of the boat. The gas stations are in the middle of the river, like you see here in the bottom left. And the other picture there is just a port of Manaus with the boats pulling up, dropping people off, picking up new people on their different routes around the Amazon. So I went twice to try to find this sundew. When I finally found out more or less where it was, I first went in October 2005, and it was so dry that I could not get to the spot. The rivers were so low, I just couldn't reach it. We had to turn around, and we ran out of fuel. Long story, but anyways, I went back a year later in December 2006, and with a little boat like this guy over here, I just basically walked up to the port of Manaus and showed the guy on the map. Google Maps was just starting Google Earth. I remember I printed out some images from Google Earth and I sort of guided the guy. Look, you go upriver, turn right over here in this river, and I think it took about 4 hours to get there. Anyways, so we did reach the spot. I'll get more into that later, but another important factor is, again, the chemistry of the water changes tremendously. This is the famous spot just south of Manaus, where the Amazon River meets the Rio Negro, and as you can see here, completely different water chemistries. They'll go for kilometers and kilometers and kilometers without fully mixing. The Amazon River very muddy, bringing water from the Andes, whereas the Rio Negro basically drains the Guyana highlands, sandstone escarpments, where, of course, very poor nutrients, very typical CP habitats, and you tend to get this sort of tea-colored water, or Coca-Cola fish-colored water, that if you're actually swimming in it, as in this picture that Jeremiah took, he loves his selfies, and this presentation was made with knowing that he would be at the ICPS conference. I hope he joined this call. But anyways, it's a little bit, poking fun at Jeremiah's selfies, but it's very. Oh, is he? Oh, excellent. Hi, Jeremiah. Anyways, I love the selfie because it shows the color of the water. When you go and swimming in these Black River waters, they're actually sort of reddish. Just a lot of tannins just from the vegetation that's leaching into the water. So very acidic. Anyways, the Google Earth image. There's Manaus here in the bottom right corner. And this is the image that I used to navigate to this spot where the Sundews have been discovered. So several hours away, about 100 kilometers upriver. And I just basically showed the picture to the guy. This is where I want to go. He estimated in how much time it would take, how much fuel we would need, how much it would cost. And then I just had like zoomed in images of this little river where, sort of guiding him, oh, go straight here, go left there. And the problem is that it looks very different between wet season and dry season. So here's two different images from the same spot. In the wet season, you can see here on the left, it's like completely flooded and easy to navigate all the way up to that spot. But even the spot where the Sundews grow is flooded as well. Whereas in the dry season, you might not even be able to reach there, like it happened to me the first time. But you see that the habitats are now above water. And what are these habitats? They're just sandy, grassy, sort of open habitats along the rivers. Something to do with, why doesn't rainforest grow there? Part of it is just the nutrients in the soil, the lack of nutrients in the soil, just sandy soils, and the fact that they get flooded. And the point of reference was this cachoeira, or waterfall in Portuguese, of the Cuieiras River. And of course, not much of a waterfall, but any little drop in the water they call a waterfall in the Amazon. But this is the reference point that I had in, and we got there, and I'm looking around, and all I'm seeing is these trees. I'm thinking, where the hell are these CP habitats? But that's the thing, the Amazon, you're going along these rivers. If you don't have a drone or something of, flying above you and showing you, there's all these floodplains, these grassy, sandy floodplains along the rivers that you only see on images of Google Earth, or like I said, if you have a drone. So the first time I went there, I was stumped. I'm like, where the hell would this Sundew grow? But so we just sort of, got off the boat and started walking through the forest. Eventually we found these open habitats along the rivers. And it's one of these campinarana habitats that I was telling you guys before. So as you can see, open, grassy with a few bushes, and the Sundews were everywhere. As you can see in this picture, for those of you who are not colorblind, tons of little red Sundews everywhere. And I thought this was a fluke at first, but more and more, and you guys will see later in the presentation, these habitats are extremely common along the Blackwater rivers in the Amazon. So here's another view, forms a little column of dead leaves, sort of like Drosera from the Tepuis. But the cool thing is that it has these very short flowerscapes, so single flowers, sessile practically within the leaves. And so I was able to see in 2006, and a few years later, we actually published this, 2009. So this became Drosera amazonica. And at the time, it was only known from that one location. A little bit before the publication, we found herbarium specimen from another population further north, and another old specimen without an exact location from Venezuela. So it sort of indicated to us that it was more widespread. And years later, I now know there's probably a lot more widespread. We just haven't explored a lot of these campinarana habitats enough. Anyways, there was another herbarium of another Sundew that looked a little bit different, also from the Amazon basin, more in the northwestern part of the Amazon basin. And it had been named Drosera biflora, and over the years it was lumped with a whole bunch of other species, kept changing names. But a few years ago, my colleague Paulo Gonella was looking at a little bit closer at this herbarium, and he noticed, maybe this is a good species after all. We've been considering a synonym. Maybe we should investigate this further, but all we had were these herbarium specimens. Somebody needs to mute themselves. Hiya, Jarva, if you can mute yourself, please. Anyway, so just went through multiple names, and we thought that maybe it was something that deserved the name, but we didn't have the plants. We only had these really old herbarium specimens from 1800, 1820, smushed little plants with very little detail. And they were collected somewhere around the border between Colombia and Venezuela in the northwestern part of the Amazon basin. So a friend of ours, my good friend Sergio from Colombia, went to this area in September 2019, and he found a plant that looked like that herbarium specimen that I just showed you guys. And we're like, oh my gosh, could this be the long lost Drosera biflora? Hasn't been seen since 1820. And he showed us pictures, and we're like, yeah, that sort of looks like it. So what was it, 2 months later? Yeah, I think 2 months later, we were back. So he went in 2019, and 2 months later, November, we were back there. Here's Sergio over here on the right. There's me, our guide, and Sebastian, also from Colombia, another carnivorous plant guy, orchid guy from Colombia, and Hilo, who's our guide. So we went back there in November to explore that region, and I was just amazed at how many sandy habitats there were all along the Atabapo River, which is one of these blackwater rivers. And it's such an amazing region that we actually ended up going back in 2021 in May, so different season. When Sergio was first there in September 2019, the waters were starting to go down from the wet season. And then when we were there in November, the waters were even further lower down. And they keep going down until about February. And then in March, they start rising again. By the time we went there in May, most of the CP habitats we'd seen in November in 2019 were already completely flooded. And I'll show you that a little bit later. So to get there, we have to fly through Bogota. And the first trip I went there was these protests going on. As you can see here, it looks like RoboCop. There's actually a policeman. Several protests that delayed flights and had a few issues getting to Puerto Inírida, which is the city closest to the Atabapo River. And it's on the Puerto Inírida is close to where two rivers meet. And as you can see, just by the color of the rivers, there are different chemistries coming from different regions, different highlands. And Inírida is famous for this flower. It's the Inírida flower they call it. It's the local state flower. It's a very common plant. They're very pretty. Now I'm trying to go fast and short because I only have 1 hour and still a lot of slides. So from Puerto Inírida, similar thing to what we did in Manaus. We go down to the port, we talk to the local boat guys, and we have our guy Nilo helping us there, and we rent a boat for X number of days, take all the fuel, take all the food. And so here's us on that second trip, Jeremiah and Ray, Sergio, myself. And so where do we stay on these trips? Well, we go to little local Indian villages, communities, and they'll give us some space to sleep in. Sometimes it's just sort of an open hut like this one that we call the Playa Blanca was the name of the village. We called it the Playa Blanca Hilton. And we'll be sleeping, similar places like this, a different village called Concordia, where we just set up our hammocks, and that's where we were sleeping. And Mavecure was another spot that we were sleeping along the river. And notice it's just, little thatched roofs, and that's it. A lot of times they don't even have walls, so the mosquito nets are important, of course. And Remonso was another village that we stayed in. These had actually nice little houses with beds. And here we are arriving with all our backpacks and food. And there are a lot of dogs in these villages. I'm not a huge fan. So you think, they're there to protect you, whatever, from wild animals. Quite the opposite. I actually got bitten by one of those dogs. You'll see in a picture later on. But this is the place that we spent the most time in. On the second trip, they actually created this for tourists in one of the villages in Playa Blanca. This beautiful little house. I think they built it with all the money that we left them on the first trip paying, because you have to pay multiple fees for the village, for being there, for food, for guides, whatever. And so here we are setting up with our hammock set up. There's Ray sleeping on the floor. And we just bathed in the river. itself. The river's right there. We bathe in the river at night. That's the shower we have. So, we have our own private little bungalow, a little bit far from the village itself. So pretty private and with a beach view and our own infinity river pool. And there's multiple little pools all around and rivers that you can go swimming in, and no, you're not going to be eaten by piranhas or attacked by alligators or whatever. It's relatively safe. But one cool thing that we didn't expect is that a lot of these blackwater rivers in the dry season, when the water's going down, a lot of fish collect in some of these pools and get, stuck in these pools and basically end up dying in the dry season. And we took our snorkeling masks. So when we weren't just cooling off from the heat, because it's hot as hell there, whether mud or water, we started snorkeling. We started finding a whole bunch of cool little fish. So here's first time I ever saw actual angelfish in the wild, cardinal tetras, and a whole bunch of other little aquarium fish that we see in aquarium trade all the time. These are some of the places they come from. Anyways, back to the villages. We usually would hire one of the village ladies to cook for us, and they'd cook in these little mud sort of stoves. And of course, we'd take food, and most of the food was provided by us, but sometimes they'd fish for us, sell us the fish, of course, or provide other meals. So, we had some food that we bring from the Puerto Inírida, or bought in the supermarket, other stuff that the villagers would sell us. So here's a little boat coming by the river selling us fish and fruit. So sometimes, for example, here are the pineapples or this cool fruit. In Brazil, we call this ingá. It's a large pod. I think I've heard cotton candy fruit or something in English. But you basically suck on the seeds, and it's just very sweet, very, very tasty. What else? Bananas, of course. And the fish, sometimes we'd get fresh fish, sometimes we'd get smoked fish, and even piranha, they'd sell us. Not the tastiest of fish, I have to say. Or sometimes they'd bring us some of the local fauna. Like we had this curacao for Thanksgiving on the November 2019 trip. That was actually our Thanksgiving turkey. Or the famous mohohoi. I think that's what they're called, the grubs. Not my favorite either, but interesting. Local delicacy, little coconut palm grubs. Anyways, back to the rivers. So the main river that we were exploring was the Atabapo River. And the Atabapo River flows into the Guaviare and the Orinoco, and it's an interesting junction of three different rivers, different colors. You can see from the satellite pictures the colors of the water, how the Atabapo is very dark black water, so very acidic, very sandy margins. As you can see here, this picture from the dry season, how sandy it becomes. And here's a picture from the dry season, where you see the Orinoco up ahead, the Guaviare, and here's the Atabapo, very sandy, the tea-colored water, and looking south along the Atabapo. Very, very sandy, hard to navigate at this time of the year. Anyways, we were there to explore the campinarana habitats along the Atabapo River. It's tons of these habitats, very grassy, very sandy, very hot, extremely hot. Flooded parts of the year, above water, other parts of the year, how much? It's a bit for discussion, but anyways, there are a lot of these different habitats in different places that we explored in different villages. Yeah, with these trips, we confirmed that Drosera biflora not only does grow longer, but it is a good species. And it does seem closely related to Drosera amazonica, has a few more flowers per flowerscape, longer flowerscapes, but very similar habitats. It's cool that it has these like really large sepals, even though it's a tiny little plant most of the time. So we're able to rediscover this long lost species after 120 years without any records. We've actually incorporated this. It's been found also in Brazil, not just in the Colombian side. We found it on the Venezuelan side of the Atabapo River, and it's been collected on the Brazilian side of the border as well. Another species we found in this area is Drosera esmeralda, which is pretty widespread in the northern Amazon basin. Also grows in the lowlands, up and a little bit higher, actually meets Drosera roraima in some places, in some mountains, and forms hybrid swarms. Unfortunately for us, we discovered that it also forms hybrid swarms with Drosera biflora. So this really confused us. In the beginning, in the first trip, we weren't sure what this was. It was a big biflora, but after a while, we realized that when they had this hybrid veer to them where they were bigger than both biflora and esmeralda, lots of flowerscapes, often plants growing off the flowerscapes, but no seeds. And they form these big hybrid swarms, so huge populations, often with utricularia in the middle. And there's, of course, Jeremiah taking his selfies. Hey, Jeremiah. But then we found these little plants that were like, what the hell is this? It sort of looks like a biflora, but it also looks like an Amazonica. Is this Amazonica? Just with slightly longer flower scapes. They seem to be more common along the water, sometimes underwater, sometimes a little bit above water, or were they just etiolated bifloras? So here are two pictures with the Sundews underwater. I don't know if you can tell, but both of these pictures are underwater, right? The one on the right, there's actually a lot of silt on the leaves. They look a little more etiolated because they're a little bit deeper. We found a lot of these in the submerged habitats. You know, we're looking not just in the shallow areas, but some of the deeper areas. Luckily, we had the snorkeling masks when we went in the wet season last time in 2021. We found, we actually went snorkeling some of the spots that we'd explored in the dry season, and they were like 3 meters underwater. So, we found them all the way from, close to the surface like this one to several centimeters below the surface and already looking a little etiolated and ugly, all the way to like this guy that we found 3 meters underwater. After a few months being at that depth, you can see both the etiolated green new leaves and the old reddish leaves that from the dry season when the plants were immersed. And this is really confusing because these rivers will flood for several months. And we're like, do these sundews actually survive for multiple months underwater? We're not sure. Do they die and then grow back from the roots or from seeds? Or do they grow as annuals in the water? Or did they just somehow survive? Because not only are they covered in water, but they're covered in this Coca-Cola dark water that prevents sunlight from reaching them for multiple months. Anyways, we weren't sure, are these Amazonica, are these biflora, is this a hybrid, is it a new species? And in 2022, somebody actually sent us pictures from another location along the Atabapo River where it does seem to be Amazonica. So we were suspecting Amazonica probably grew there, and this was confirmed in 2022. So now we're thinking that maybe Amazonica and biflora do form these hybrid swarms, and that they seem to like these ultra wet habitats for whatever reason. Are there also Amazonica biflora hybrids? Maybe. So yeah, we probably need another trip or two to really figure this out, or just do a lot of genetic testing. But we still have a lot of questions, and most importantly for me is how the hell do these sundews survive for 5 to 8 months out of the year, maybe underwater, several meters of water, black water that they can't do photosynthesis, or do they even survive, or do they grow like annuals? It's, from what we saw in the dry season, they seem to be coming up pretty quickly. So my guess is that they do survive, even if they're growing back from roots, but they do seem to survive. So what else did we see? We found this little mystery Genlisea with little purple flowers. As you can see from my hand over here, the picture on the right, and mostly short flower scapes. We couldn't find any leaves. The Genlisea seemed to have no leaves. And we looked all over. We found several populations, and we didn't find a single leaf. There were a lot of traps, of course, the leaves as traps, the underground leaves, right? The traps, but no above, surface leaves, green leaves for photosynthesis, which is really weird. And at first, we're all excited, thinking, "Oh my gosh, this is a new species!" And it's not every day you discover a new Genlisea species. But then, at the end of that first trip I did in 2019, I'm like, you know what? There's something similar that was published just a year before from Brazil, but it was much bigger. I wonder if it could be that plant. And sure enough, we compared later, and yeah, same thing. This was published as Genlisea multiflora, Andreas Fleischmann, and a few others. Just a year before we went on that trip to Colombia, and similar thing. No leaves were found. But the plants that they found were maybe a little bit later in the dry season. They had much longer flower scapes, but it is the same species in the end. But they're like 100 kilometers away from each other, these two known populations. So I'm sure there must be more in the middle and more of these campinarana habitats along rivers that just haven't really been explored yet. We're talking about Lenticulariaceae. Let's see a few other species that we found. A lot of species were found on this trip, okay? In a lot of different habitats along the rivers. So Genlisea, we found a lot of Genlisea oxycentrum. A lot of variation, sometimes more glandular, like you see in the upper left, or here in the center, a little bit less, almost glabrous. So a little bit of variation there, but they all seem to be Genlisea oxycentrum, which is a relatively small yellow species. We found a boatload of Utricularia, like pubescens. Tenuissima was pretty common, little white flowered species, a lot of yellow flowered. So from this little group of, I really like this group of eutrix because they have these sepals that look like little Venus flytraps. And one of them was especially common. Longiciliata forms these little rosettes that look like Genlisea, but it's actually a utricula. You see these little green rosettes everywhere. They're very common. Flowers are pretty similar, yellowish. Another common species in that area is Cheiriobicatensis. As you can see, covering a lot of these grassy, sandy floodplains, the campinaranas. Other species we found not as common, Juncia, Nana, Subulata, Triloba, Trichophila, Nervosa, Placilla, a lot of yellow flowered species, as you can see. Myriacysta was a species I was happy to see. It's an aquatic species closely related to Purpurea in the US. Not very common to find in the wild, though, so I was happy to see this one. Olivaceae is one of the smallest utricularia known. Hard to see it. It also grows in the US and throughout Latin America. Tiny little plants, microscopic. And this one was really weird. As you can see here in the morning, the dew was sort of concentrated in like two neat little rows along the flowerscape, which I thought was really odd. What else? The Amethystina tricolor complex, there's a lot of variation. I can't tell you exactly how many species were there, but we think there are at least 3, Amethystina, tricolor, and Hertella. This group has been split up into multiple species the past few years. What else? Guyanensis, pretty widespread species, very unusual species as well. So we weren't exploring just sandy habitats along rivers. There's some other interesting habitats. For example, granitic domes or Inselbergs along some of these rivers. It's a very famous spot along one of the local rivers there. An important tourist destination. It's just got these beautiful granitic domes with the Guaviare River cutting right through it. And we found a lot of carnivorous plants growing at the base of these granitic domes and these just sort of shallow habitats growing on the bare rock with water seeping down during the wet season. So a lot of these are probably annuals. I found a really amazing species that I'd only seen once in the wild before in Venezuela, Genlisea senariapuana. It's one of the biggest Genlisea there is. There's a lot of it. Really beautiful plant, dark purple flowers with these huge traps on the surface. It's got like dimorphic traps, smaller traps underneath the ground, and larger traps sort of on the above the soil for whatever reason, different prey. Anyways, really beautiful plant. We also found some Utricularia hispida, which is a very widespread species, but in the Guyana highlands area, northern Amazon, it has tremendous variation. I wouldn't be surprised if this was split into multiple new species in the future. And we also found another little utricularia that it's actually a new species that's similar to hispida, similar to Calliciphyta, sort of in the middle. We're joking, calling it Calicifispida. And we found it growing actually the first time just by the Nidida airport, in this little ditch by the airport. But then we found it also in Mavecure in these granitic domes. And so, yeah, one of the new species we found there. We also found a plant that might be a long lost species that hasn't been seen in many years, Utricularia schultzii. I'm not sure about this one, but Sergio is sure about it. But I would love to see more of it so we can be sure, confirm it. What else? Another very common species on these granitic domes is Utricularia oliveriana, which is really cool because it grows right on the rock as a rheophytic plant. And has these mats of green little leaves and all these little sort of cream flowers, very, very fragrant flowers, so probably pollinated by night insects, not sure. And when we were climbing this granitic dome, looking along the rivers, we'd see some grassy floodplains, and I saw this little mining area, what looked like a mining area, just sand pit. I thought, you know what, let's go check that out. Why don't we hike over there, try to get to that little mining pit. These disturbed areas sometimes have a lot of CPs that just invade from neighboring habitats. So we decided to go there, and it was actually one of the best things we did on this trip because we found an amazing species called Utricularia naviculata, which is one of the smallest Utricularia. And the cool thing about this is that it's only the third known collection of this species and the first record for Colombia. It had only been collected, let me see, here we go. It was only known from 2 collections, one in Venezuela and one in Brazil. The Venezuela one was 1959. In Brazil, I forget, it was also a long time ago. And it's probably common, but it's just such a tiny species that it's mostly overlooked. Oh, there we go. The second collection was in Brazil. Who knows when? About 1,300 kilometers away. Yeah, it's pretty widespread in the Amazon basin. It's probably much more common than we think, but this was only the third known collection of this species. Another really cool species I was really happy to find was Utricularia viscosa. I'd never seen this species before. It's pretty widespread, but not so easy to find. It was growing as an affixed aquatic. As you can see here, very beautiful location with the granitic domes. Pretty deep water, very beautiful purple flowers. Anyway, so other than Utricularia, and so we already talked about the sundews we found, the Genlisea, the Utricularia. Of course, there's tons of other things to see there. There are the water lilies that we really enjoy going swimming with the water lilies. It's just the border between Venezuela and Colombia. We try to stick to the Colombian side, which is safer. What else? Yeah, so there are some areas we explored, like rainforest areas, just to see animals, where we'd go in these little boats and just go around all day. And of course, there's mosquitoes, lots of bugs. Oh yeah, we found this little baby tree sloth in the water one day. We don't know what happened. It fell from the trees. Who knows? We saved it, took it to a local village. They tried to keep it alive for a few. I think it died after a few months, unfortunately. But it was just the poor. We found the poor thing swimming in one of the little flooded rivers. And of course, we went fishing for piranha, which was a huge hit with the gringos. And we stopped along multiple villages, slept in multiple villages, and of course, we're always very curious to see us. And we'd make popcorn for the kids and go swimming in the rivers. We'd buy fruit. These local women were selling us some native fruit. I forget what fruit it was, something I'd never eaten before. We'd be passing by them as they're washing their clothes or pots and pans, and they had some interesting pets. I don't know if you've seen this animal before. It's hard to say that this is allegedly one of the tastiest animals in the Amazon, and so they're probably keeping it until it's old enough to be eaten, unfortunately. But they're really cute rodent. And of course, you saw tons of other cool plants, not just carnivorous plants. Aerial caldacea and this caterpillar flower they called it. It was really beautiful how it had different colors as it matured. Orchids, more orchids, and I don't even remember what that was. A passion flower. This was really cool. I don't know if you're familiar with Xyridaceae on the left. I had just read an article about this, but there's a fungus that infects Xyridaceae flowers. And then what you're seeing here on the right is the actual fungus itself, that it comes out and it sort of imitates the flowers. And so what they imagine is that there's some insect that normally pollinates these flowers, and when it gets the fungus mixed up for the flower, it goes there and it gets covered in what do you call it, spores, and then takes those spores to other plants. So it's sort of like pollination, but with fungus and spreading spores to parasitic spores to other flowers. So that was really cool. There was actually a lot of this. I was surprised. But it was beautiful. Talk about fungi, some beautiful little red fungi and other fungi. And of course, lots of cool animals as well. Not as many as people imagine for the Amazon. It's really hard to see animals in most of the Amazon, mostly because locals eat them all. But there's some cool ones like this. I forget what this bird is called, but it has like these little hooks on the wing, which are really cool. And cool spiders, bats. We saw a lot of bats just hanging out. And, like these trees are hanging over the rivers. Often there'd be like bats underneath. And when we'd be going along on boats, all of a sudden we scare them and the bats would all go flying out. There's this cool red crab that we saw in one little river. Caterpillars, a lot of colorful caterpillars everywhere. This little tree frog, I don't know how the hell we saw this because it's so well camouflaged. What else? Lots of interesting bugs, beetles, and what was this? Why did I? Oh yeah, I put this picture here. I forgot because it's a little butterfly apparently pollinating Utricularia nervosa. The first time I see a potential pollinator, at least a visitor to Utricularia nervosa flowers, which is cool. I was just going from one to another, visiting a bunch of flowers, little terrapins, turtles. This one we didn't see a wild one, but one of the local villages had like this enclosure with one of these cats in it. I forget what ocelot, I think in English. What else? More little colorful beetles like this guy. Look at the color of this beetle. It's amazing. Birds, lots of parrots and macaws, and more little frogs. What else? Snakes. We did see a few snakes, not too much. This one I think was maybe the only venomous one we saw. river dolphins, really hard to photograph, unfortunately, believe it or not. It's like the bad photograph because you never know where they're going to surface, but there are freshwater river dolphins. Another horrible picture, but that's a river otter. You're really happy to see those, but they're very skittish. And, of course, everybody looks at it as, wow, I want to go there too. That looks so fun. We're just going on little CP vacations, right? But as I mentioned before, things happen like dog bites. Got bitten by one of the village dogs and had to go, as soon as I got back to civilization, had to get rabies shots and antibody shots. I never gotten so many shots in my life. Um, so yeah, what else? Vaccinations, yellow fever, whatever. Oh, and there's me getting antibody shots. They had to inject it around each little wound, multiple shots. Um, what else? So yeah, there's all sorts of issues that you would expect in places like that. Issues getting to the place, right? I mean, it's the flights, it's the protests in Colombia that delayed. I was literally on a flight from Miami to Bogota, and the flight returned to Miami because there were protests around the airport, and the plane wouldn't be able to land, and all, of course, dealing with the weather, the heat, the humidity, or at night it can get really cold along these rivers sometimes, and all these different bugs and bites and the safety concerns, like, trying, like I was saying before, we're trying to stick the Colombian side of the river. At one point, like some Venezuelan military guys crossed the river, came and started questioning us. And we're like, wait, we're on the Colombian side. What are they doing here? But you're in the middle of the Amazon. Who cares, right? Borders. So yeah, we're hiking around all day, like 40 degrees Celsius, whatever it is, Fahrenheit. And we're not getting enough sleep because, yeah, we're not there on vacation. We're there at work. So we're waking up early and hiking all day, making herbarium specimens, pickling plants and alcohol. And a lot of our time is just spent, photographing, herborizing, hiking. And so here we are, several different points along the trips, like washing plants in the river so that we could herborize them, or sitting in the restaurant at the airport herborizing stuff. And during the day, there we are, pressing plants. I'm trying to get the humidity out of the plants by pressing them against my clothes, and or literally washing the plants in the rivers, trying to get these complete traps of Genlisea, which is so difficult, just washing and washing, trying to get all the little grass roots and sand and mud. And, there we are, Sergio and I herborizing, working. And of course, there's Jeremiah looking at his watch thinking, oh, geez, how long is this going to take, One of these botanists going to let us leave this darn site. We'd be working during the day, we'd be working during the night, but of course, some of us working, right? There's me and Sergio, and Sergio's taking pictures, the little details of the traps and the hairs and the scales and whatever on the flowerscapes. I'm taking notes of everything he's seeing and of what we saw during that day. And of course, Jeremiah, well, he's just there posing for his Instagram pictures, of course, right? And Andreas, our good friend Andreas Fleischmann in Germany, helping us with a lot of the literature information sometimes of, when was the last time this plant was seen, and he's our living encyclopedia. And of course, no matter how much we, try to collect and photograph and register as much as we can, all the details we can of all these plants we see, because a lot of times we don't even have time to realize we found a new species until months later, looking at some of these details. But of course, Andreas it's never enough for him because he's, like I said, living encyclopedia. He's asking after the trip, well, did you photograph this? Did you photograph that? Did you do this? Did you? I was like, we didn't have time. We didn't think about that. So, making fun of Andreas as well in his questioning after these trips. Yeah, it's a lot of work, planning these trips and making sure everything's working well, and and that we're staying safe, and oftentimes, we're not getting much sleep. So here's Jeremiah and I caught at one place, just trying to sleep it off between one boat trip and another, sleeping on the plane whenever we can. And yeah, on the boats and anywhere we can, we just catch up on our sleep. Conclusions. Let me see how much time I have. Good, 15 minutes. So conclusions. Two main conclusions from these trips. Not just the 3 Colombia trips that Sergio, myself, and others went on, but also other explorations in the Amazon basin. We found a lot of species growing in these sandy campinarana habitats along the rivers. So just for the Guainía area in Colombia, so in that Atabapo River, in that area between the sandy campinarana habitats and the granitic domes, we found at least 3 species of Drosera. Biflora was rediscovered after 120 years, Amazonica, Esmeralda, and then possibly 3 hybrids, maybe 4. So Amazonica, biflora, probably, biflora Esmeralda for sure, and maybe Amazonica Esmeralda as well. I think I'm missing one here. Wait a second, Esmeralda, biflora. Anyways, so at least 3 hybrids and 3 Sundew species were found. Genlisea, we found 3 species, and as you can see, the exclamation mark here is just for species that were new collections for Colombia. I don't know how many of you are familiar, but for decades, Colombia was sort of, we couldn't really go in there to research, do anything because there's so much conflict going on, civil war in the country with the FARCs. And in like 2 decades, they completely turned around, and now it's like really safe to go in most of the country. And it's a boom for biologists right now. We're going all over discovering tons of new species in all sorts of habitats that for decades we couldn't go into. And so that was the case. I'm sure, these plants are probably not rare if you just go and explore these areas. And so we found 2 Genlisea that had never been recorded for Colombia, the Sanariapuana as well, really beautiful. Utriculare, we found somewhere between 25 and 30 species, including possibly 2 or 3 new species. And so here's a list of all the new species. The exclamation mark shows the ones that are new for Colombia. And I was really happy again with naviculata, or naviculata, because it's only the 3rd known collection of this species ever. Second conclusion, which I only really realized when I was finishing this presentation, after hours and hours putting the presentation together, it really started like dawning on me that one thing we hadn't really noticed is that these sandy habitats, they're much more common than we think. I mean, Google Maps, the resolution is, or Google Earth, the resolution is still not very good in most of these areas. So it's hard to see, but there are a lot of seasonal floodplains along the Blackwater rivers in the northern part of the Amazon. It's just huge habitats, huge areas that have tons of these campinarana habitats along all these Blackwater rivers draining the Guyana highlands mostly. And this is a huge region, right? So I've put 2 circles here sort of showing where these Blackwater rivers are, where there's a lot of these sandy habitats along the rivers. And if you look, it's a huge area. It's like 1,500 kilometers across this these rivers that drain the Guyana highlands. There's a huge potential for exploring new CP habitats. And so, when we talk about common CP habitats or Tepui habitats, savanna habitats, well, campinarana habitats are also, it's a brand new habitat that I wasn't even aware of until recently, and it's much more widespread and a much larger geographic area than I was expecting. And as you saw, with a lot of species and even new species, I believe there's still a lot to explore. It's just very remote and very expensive to explore these areas, of course, because paying the fuel for these little boats, the guides, the trips, everything, of course, it all adds up, right? So those were the 2 conclusions, right? That there's a lot of carnivorous plant species in the Amazon basin itself, known, unknown species, but a lot of them just more widespread than we thought before, and that these habitats are a lot more common than we thought, mostly along Blackwater rivers. In the seasonal floodplains, these plants get flooded at least part of the year. Whether they grow as perennials or annuals or both is still up for discussion. Right, so in conclusion, huge thank you, of course, to Sergio, my good friend Sergio, who helped with planning a lot of these trips and discussions and negotiations, of course, with locals and organizing the trips, and who tipped us off to Drosera biflora growing there in the Atabapo River. And of course, many others who helped. And Andreas was never able to join us, unfortunately, on the trips, maybe in a future trip, and others who were there with us, like Jeremiah, Sebastian, Ray, and of course, Ed Reed and Herrick were not there in Colombia, but they were with me in exploring the Brazilian Amazon, and others, guides and friends. And of course, my supervisor for my initial Drosera work, Dr. Hasebe, who helped a lot in my initial years, my formative years. And I really appreciated that the German Carnivorous Plant Society organized the ICPS conference in May in Vienna and hosted and did a fantastic job and gave me the space to talk about this, make this presentation. And of course, ICPS for helping to organize and to give me the second opportunity to present this to you guys for all of those who weren't able to make it to the Vienna conference in May. And I think that's it. And we have time for questions, Kenny. Woohoo, I made it in less than an hour.
Thank you so much, Fernando. That was excellent. And like he alluded to, this was originally presented at the Vienna, Austria conference. And we're going to be having another conference coming up in the year 2026. ICPS is a group of about 1,400 paid members. And we've been around for over 50 years. And the society was once just a club for plant growers, but now we have evolved into a truly international society with a professional quality journal and an increasing voice in the world of conservation. And we have a vast network of horticulturists, and we are excited to welcome new growers and experienced researchers. Every month we have a webinar, but in December we have 2 more, so for a total of 3. And then in early 2025, we have Noah Juvie, who is attending this webinar. He's going to be doing one on Drosera petiolaris. And then in February, we have another webinar, and we're going to keep on scheduling them for the rest of the year. The first Wednesday of May every year is World Carnivorous Plant Day, and you can go to our YouTube channel to see the last 4 years of World Carnivorous Plant Day. This is when hobbyists and growers and professionals all around the world send us videos to celebrate these fascinating plants. And this year it is the 5th anniversary of World Carnivorous Plant Day. So if you would like to submit a video on maybe 5 tips on how to grow Nepenthes on a windowsill, or 5 Drosera species you can see in the Amazonian basin, or 5 ways to feed your Venus flytrap, we are interested in your videos. To learn more, you can send me an email at kenny@carnivorousplants.org, or if you're interested in presenting a webinar, you can definitely also send me an email. We would love for you to be a member, and membership is a way to contribute to our international exchange of knowledge. This is our official membership website, and you can become a real regular member where you get a beautiful quarterly full-colored newsletter seen here. And this features regular columns, horticulture articles, research papers, field trip reports, conservation news, and cultivar descriptions. So if you want to register a carnivorous plant because you see it's a little special, a little bit bigger, a little more colorful, we are the official place to register your cultivated varieties, a cultivar. And here's some more pictures. You can also become an e-member where you don't get this colored newsletter, but you get access to the digital version. For the past couple of years, we've had the Carnivores in the Classroom grant, and these are our sponsors for this year. These organizations and companies help fund real live carnivorous plants into K through 12 classrooms all around the world. Another way you can help support the ICPS is by going to our international store, and you can kind of see that I'm wearing the original first year World Carnivorous Plant Day t-shirt. We have new designs, and like I mentioned, every other year we have an international conference, and in the year 2026, we will be in the Americas. We do not know if we will be in North, Central, or South America yet, but we should be making this announcement around May of 2025.
In addition, do you collect specimens or seeds for further study under cultivation, or are they just for herbarium?
Thanks, Steve. Sorry. So a little bit of everything. right? With the permits, depending on which trip, which region we're in, yeah, sometimes there's seeds, sometimes there's plants. A lot of times it's mostly herbarium specimens. Of course, the pictures help out a lot in the research. Like I mentioned, pickled plants, depending Utricularia, sometimes with the tiny traps and things like that, it's sometimes better to have them in alcohol. So yeah, it depends on the species, what was available and what sorts of permits we had. It varied a lot.
Okay. Perhaps Smith would like to know, how much do these expeditions cost? Like, who's the funding agent?
My company. Yeah, it's hobby, at least for me. I mean, it's hobby, and so yeah, it comes all of out of my vacation funds.
The habitat team's having a pretty big temperature jump between the day and the night.
Yeah, when I said it was cold, it's relatively cold in that, we don't go dressed for cold weather in the Amazon usually. So during the day, like 40 degrees Celsius, and then you go to bed in a hammock where air is circulating all around you. And all you need is a little bit of, wind to come by the hammock at night, and it gets pretty chilly very quickly. So, I mean, I don't think I saw anything below maybe 20 degrees Celsius, but it could get very chilly at night. Just we had to put on some sweatpants or something to sleep in those hammocks because by the river with all the wind, yeah, it gets chilly quickly.
Ruby,
I see somebody's
future.
asking about the Utricularia olivacea. Yeah, as far as I could tell, that was dew on the flowerscape. Why the dew was collecting in two neat little rows along the flowerscape? Was there some little scale or hair or something there that was collecting like that? I don't know.
Juby, future ICPS webinar presenter asks, do you think there are additional Drosera taxa yet to be discovered in this bioregion?
Oh, for sure, for sure. I mean, you saw 1,500 kilometers in diameter of a region where we've explored, like some extremes on the outskirts, and in the middle is just so unexplored still. There's just no big cities from where, we can fly into and, rent a boat or something and there's so many little hills and mountains along, in that whole region that you think, maybe it's not as high as a Tepui, but how high do you need it, to have a unique little habitat there maybe? And after we found Drosera magnifica a few years ago in Brazil, the largest sundew in the Western Hemisphere, growing on a little mountain that wasn't even remote. It's like, yeah, anything can happen.
For Drosera hunting during the Amazonian dry or wet season?
Sorry, say that again?
Do you prefer looking for sundews in the dry or wet?
Well, pros and cons, but preferably in the dry season. So when the rivers are lower is when you have more chance of seeing more of these exposed habitats. Because if you go too late in the wet season, you're not going to see anything. It's just flooded forests. You might see some aquatic folio, Utricularia folio, but that's it.
To go back to find more sundews, and then he says, don't waste precious time chasing you tricks. Tricks are for kids.
And that's the problem. We talk, depending who we talk to, wait, but didn't you photograph XYZ? And, I have a bunch of biologist friends who have different interests. Andreas Fleischmann, for example, is really interested in these little caterpillars, these butterflies that eat the sundew flowers. And we took a picture of one, that we couldn't care less about. But he's looking at the picture like, oh my gosh, it's a new species. Didn't you collect the caterpillar? And I was like, sorry, there's only so much time in the day that. And I have friends who work with all sorts of different plants and animals, and they're asking me, I was like, sorry, I didn't have time. I was focused on the carnivorous plants.
Specimens of Drosera amazonica, were they mislabeled or were they just unidentified as
Unidentified. I mislabeled them because I didn't know what they were. So yeah, they were unidentified, and I at first thought that maybe there was something similar to Myristocaulus because of the short flower scapes, and afterwards, like, oh no, there's something completely different and new, and that's when we published it. Yeah, believe it or not, most of the new species, you don't find them in the field, you find them in herbaria. You start looking through these old specimens and you start seeing weird stuff, and then you confirm it by going in the field and finding them.
think you said it in this presentation, but the photo that we shared on social media today, you had just there in your mouth.
Genlisea.
Genlisea.
So I only have two hands, right? So I was holding this little piece of soil, the Genlisea we'd collected that we wanted to herborize. And with the other hand, I'm sort of like trying to, pull the grasses and sand and soil and whatever and not breaking the traps. But then whatever traps I could collect, like, where am I going to put these? I'm going to hold them in my mouth while I keep cleaning this little piece of soil. So any little traps that I'd see like floating away, I'd grab them and just hold them in my mouth, because this the easiest place to keep them while cleaning the plants for herbarium.
William Way asked, do you have a preferred method for preserving your
I haven't personally done this in many years, but if I remember well, the recipes were for Utrix, the best recipes included, you can use anything, but to preserve like the traps in a way that can be studied easily afterwards, like not too brittle, it was supposed to be, I think, 70% alcohol, and I think 5% glycerol, and the rest water was the ideal recipe that I remember, but there might be others.
If anyone has any last questions for Fernando, you can put them in. Laura asked, there are carnivorous plants that are epiphytic. Did you see any?
So there's a lot of epiphytic Utrix in South America and Latin America, but they mostly grow in cloud forest areas. In the lowlands, I don't think we could really, there's some plants sometimes growing like at the base of trees next to the river. I don't really consider that epiphytic. There's rheophytic growing in the rocks, like we saw Utricularia olivacea, but epiphytic in the Amazonian highlands, I don't really think so.
Sure. Well, thank you, everyone who attended.
I saw Sergio was helping to answer some questions. Thank you, Sergio. Good to see you there. And I can't see questions before I accidentally clicked out of the meeting, so I don't know if there was anything before that.
Regarding the vegetation, I'll just say that people were saying that Mike was actually wondering about the series of bubbles of dew that were on the Utricularia, which
I saw Sergio answer that.
Yeah.
So yeah, he thinks there's these little scales on the side, these minute little scales, that maybe those were points for collecting or condensation, and that's why they're forming those nice little rows. And I think that's one of Sergio's pictures. Sergio has an amazing eye for detail. He's the one who finds all these little things. We'll walk past everything, and then he'll stick behind, like, wait a second, here's that naviculata that nobody's seen in 200 years. And anyways, need somebody like that.
Yeah. Well, thank you everyone for attending this, and also thanks to Fernando for presenting for us.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Kenny, for organizing this, and a great pleasure to see everybody, all friends, and hope you enjoyed it. Hope to see you all in person at the next ICPS conference.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone.
Take care. Good night. Bye, guys.
It's not a surprise that gardeners, educators, and scientists are fascinated by these unique plants. The International Carnivorous Plant Society, or ICPS, not only love these plants, but welcomes growers just getting started all the way through professional scientists. The ICPS even started an annual World Carnivorous Plant Day to celebrate them. The free online event is held the first Wednesday of May. Take a look around our website and you'll find historic documents about carnivorous plants, growing guides, free educational resources, and more. Have questions? Ask. We don't bite, but our plants do.